Hello and welcome to In the Channel from channelbuzz.ca, bringing news and information to the Canadian IT channel community for the last 16 years. I'm Robert Dutt, editor at channelbuzz.ca and your host for the show. We're continuing our coverage from Dell Technologies World in Las Vegas this week, and I wanted to close the series of Dell execs with a conversation that I think will resonate with pretty much anyone who moves Dell product, which, let's be honest, is a lot of you. Distribution is one of the topics that often gets taken for granted. It's the plumbing, it's the logistics, it's the credit line, except that's not really what distribution is anymore, and Anthony Tanoury has about as good a vantage point as anyone to explain why. He spent 30 years in the industry on both the vendor and distributor side of the table, and he's now Dell's Senior Director of Distribution, which means he's the person responsible for making the relationship between Dell and its disti partners actually work at scale. This week at DTW, Dell announced some significant changes to how it's thinking about its partner ecosystem, and distribution's right at the center of that. We talked about the evolution of distribution from warehouse and financing shop to AI enablement engine, what it actually means for partners that Dell moved 10,000 of them to distribution-led buying last year, and what the promise of deal registration in hours rather than days actually requires to make real. Let's get right into it. My chat with Anthony Tanoury. Anthony, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
So thanks for having me.
To kick things off, the definition of distribution and definition from distributors themselves of what they do has changed so dramatically over the last few years, as you've been party to on both sides of the fence now, vendor and distributor with your background. Sitting where you are now as Senior Director of Distribution, how do you kind of define the core value proposition for your distribution partners today compared to the way it may have looked a few years ago if you were in this seat or in a previous seat managing distribution?
Yeah, I think 30 years in distribution, going dating myself here. The idea of a distributor was, warehousing, finance, so on. And really the way that that's evolved and still evolving because, not everyone fully understands distribution and the value of distribution, but, it's really become the engine for all of us, OEMs to, really dive deep into the mid-market and as lead generation for all of us, so SMB, mid-market, and then really leveraging their enablement platforms for our partners. So as an example, this week, here at Dell Tech World, we've launched our full AI portfolio, and really at the end of the day, it's a platform to build off of. And our distributors, through our partners, are really, enabling those partners, especially in the mid-market, the enterprise partners, they've hired data scientists and so on. And those mid-market and SMB partners, they need our help. And we really rely on our distributors that have, AI accelerator programs and can really take a partner through the journey of how to look at AI, how to start, and then, how to implement and really get started in this space. We've met with multiple partners at this show, and we've had our partner advisory boards, and that's the number one takeaway when we're talking to our partners is, how do I get started? And I think, Jeff Clark and Michael, and they talked about that on stage. It's really, we've got the platform to build off of, and then really relying on our distributors to go enable all of our partners out there to have those conversations, and then, to build the POCs for us with their customers and take it to the next step.
Let's talk about this moment in time and managing distribution in this moment right now. Whenever I think of running a hardware vendor, running distribution, or being on the purchasing side of a solution provider right now, that's an interesting challenge with the supply chain issue, with the pricing issue, with all of that. I guess it boils down to, from your perspective, how are you leaning on distribution differently to help you guys and your partners, ultimately, especially the smaller ones, handle this issue of availability, of supply chain, of capacity, as we've seen the components price challenges across the industry?
Yeah, so that that's not unique to Dell. We're all challenged with the supply chain challenges, and it's really being, having a consistent message to our partner community, to our customers on how or why, partner with Dell in these times. And our distributors have really leaned in with us right now and getting that message out to our partners that, Dell's got a plan. Here's the plan. And, this is how we want you to, message that and relay that to your partner. So as an example, I did a keynote speech at one of our large partners events recently. And my talk track was based on how to navigate those supply challenges with us. And I spent a lot of time there, and I had multiple partners come up, afterwards, catching me outside, and comment was, that's what we need to hear. That's our challenge today. And, you tackling that head on and so to get back to your question, from a distribution perspective, they enabled me to be able to have that, to take that message to them, and then they're expanding on that to their 20,000 partners in their ecosystem.
Right. Yeah. So as you bring up an interesting thread there, I don't have time, obviously, to go through the whole keynote, but kind of the elevator pitch boiled down version of it. What's the advice to partners on tackling it from where you sit and from where Dell sits?
Yeah, really, leaning in with us and going deeper with your customers. And so, that's where you're going to, work with Dell and get, priority allocation and looking long-term versus short-term. I just need this product, in the next week to get through, this phase. Let's look at a long-term solution together, and let's plan 2 years out. Let's plan longer in some cases, and then we'll take it from there.
And that's something we heard also from Jeff Clark in Q&A, is that idea of build out those long-term plans. Put your hand up as early as you can, because it sounds like if you've got your hand up early, you've obviously got the best chance of getting that list fulfilled.
Yeah, whether it's a customer or partner, that's a true partnership, and we'll lean in when customers want to lean in with Dell.
I wanted to touch on the changes that are coming to the partner program, specifically as involves your interactions with distribution. The Dell portal is getting redone, and the Dell program's getting redone with the modern partner platform rolling out this year. You guys are baking in agentic AI into your partner platform. Meanwhile, your distributors are doing the same thing with their partner platforms. I'm curious, obviously very early in the game, but how are you and your distribution partners thinking in the long term about how those various platforms interact with each other in terms of, delineating who covers what base and that kind of thing when it comes to serving the partner, and kind of the opportunity state for what you may be able to do down the road as a result of having those platforms?
Yeah. So the key is cutting down on SLAs. How do we take getting pricing out to a partner, out to a customer from 2 to 3 days down to the matter of hours, right? And we've worked with all of our distributors over the last, year, 2 years that we've worked closely with our distributors, because, our partners rely on our distributors' platforms. And how does that integrate with ours? But the key is speed. How do we do things faster? How do we, and that is, as you stated, embedding AI into that. And so again, can't get too ahead, because we're still going down this path, and things at some points get pushed out. But we've been working on this for a long time with them. We've had a lot of meetings with them here. We've gone deep into their platforms. They all are rolling out new platforms as well. So, making sure we're doing it all at the same time and together has been key. Yeah.
One area I did want to do double click on there, one of the big promises of the new platform is deal reg approval in minutes, AI generated demand signals, those kinds of things. As Dell is accelerating its own systems, how does distribution plug into that? how does the distributor help manage or action those AI driven demand signals and facilitate those faster quote to deal reg?
Again, to get too deep into deal reg, there's a lot of nuances there, but yes, today where you've got multiple partners of record and you've got multiple partner IDs, and simplifying that down to one or two partner IDs versus 20 today that we have, and then coming with a deal registration, having partner of record is key, right? In that mix, and we do today. But the distributors are really where it starts. So partner comes to a distributor, says, hey, I need pricing on this, and I want deal registration. Today it might take the SLA thing where we just talked about 2 to 3 days to make sure you got deal registration, you get it approved, multiple systems flowing back and forth. In the future, what we're looking at, and when I say future, we'll get there, is having that one stream go start from the distributor through. AI plays into that, where it'll do the work of looking in and making sure here's the partner of record, who's on, is there a partner on record, does the end user qualify, and without multiple people, multiple email streams going back and forth, it locks it in, and so now you've got an answer back in 2 to 3 hours versus 2 to 3 days.
A lot of MSPs prefer to consume technology as a service because it's kind of in what they do, right? It's kind of, the name's kind of on the tin, and bundle that with vendors like Microsoft or security or what have you. How are you working with distributors to make Apex and infrastructure solutions seamlessly consumable within distribution and particularly on their marketplaces?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there's Apex, right? We have Dell Apex, and our competitors have their own. But we have Dell Apex, but our distributors also have their own versions of Apex, right? Or as a service models. And at the end of the day, we leverage theirs, just as well as we do our own. And it depends on the customer, it depends on the contract situation, but there are multiple vehicles to get an as a service deal done today that didn't exist a year ago, didn't exist 2 years ago, right? And and then there's moving even to another topic, the same topic, but device as a service, right? And that was something we've been talking about for a few years now and hasn't really taken off, but that's all part of this now, because the device at the edge is commingled now, with your especially in the new AI world with your server infrastructure. So it could all become part of a reoccurring revenue stream for MSPs.
And I think it makes potentially hardware more compelling to the MSP when you've gotten that tie-in. I know it's early days and it's a way off from being, I think, fully operationalized, but what you're talking about and what Jeff Clark was talking about today about, basically acting as the arbiter, sort of an orchestration layer, saying, all right, this particular bit is best handled on the infrastructure in the data center. This particular bit is best handled right here on the machine sitting by the desk side.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We've heard a lot this week about the focused accounts incentives, rewarding partners for cross-selling across line of business. And I've, it's kind of a cliche almost, in that vendors such as yourselves who have multiple lines of business are always looking for great ways to get partners to sell across those businesses. And certainly incentives is a classic way of doing that. How are you using distribution to train, enable, and facilitate partners making that leap across the portfolio, especially as this seems to be something that Denise and the team are putting a lot of the wood behind?
Yeah, so you mentioned the partner stack, or the partner program, and that's really what we leverage with driving. Coming from distribution, you typically focus where you can earn the most dollars, right? And so we're putting the dollars, on driving all lines of business for us, right? So today you may have a lot of infrastructure focused partners who like MSPs, they don't want to sell the client the edge device. But again, with AI driving from both ends now, it's become an imperative that they all don't ignore the edge devices anymore. So really leveraging distribution to, both ways. We've got CSG partners that don't sell, storage and infrastructure. And then we've got that are trying to move in that direction. And then we've got other partners saying, hey, I've got to get on board too, that are in the infrastructure space, and they've got to move in the other direction. And that's where we leverage distribution, because they have multiple enablement engines, all of our distributors, to enable those partners to do that. So for us, and again, to the partner stack, we've announced some changes here at this event with our partner advisory board that's coming up. Partner programs, you want to keep them simple, predictable for partners, and with tweaks along the way. And AI is one of those tweaks where we've got to pull the levers in different directions to get the partners and distributors moving in that motion. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be at Dell with opportunity in front of us.
That's a big tweak, or more accurately, a big series, a whole family, whole universe of tweaks to be made.
Yeah, but you don't want to pull a whole program apart, right? You've got partners that have invested and distributors that have invested in that program. So you got to make sure you do those incremental tweaks when you need them, but not blow up the whole program.
Absolutely. You mentioned off the top kind of the classic framing of distribution as the warehouse and the bank kind of structure. Let's touch on the bank side of things a little bit there. In light of everything that's going on today, in light of the infrastructure refresh opportunity that's out there, the constraints in the marketplace, financial engineering is probably more critical than ever. Dell Financial Services doing a lot of heavy lifting, but how do you view the role of the distributor when it comes to, PO financing terms, bridging the financing gap for complex projects and helping partners to manage this whole multiple balls in the air situation?
Yeah, you can't look at a partner as what they do with us just with Dell, right? So their business they have with Dell. Partners procure. We'd love them to only sell Dell for us, but they have other options, other solutions, other areas of the business that we're not focused on that they procure through distribution. So distributors have huge businesses with a lot of these partners, and so they have financial terms through the distributors that maybe we can't offer them through Dell, and leveraging our partner programs to deliver extended terms in this environment where you mentioned earlier with the supply shortages and lead times getting pushed out, and really leveraging distribution with terms that we can't give them today. So there's multiple levers, and they have much higher credit lines with the distributors than maybe we have with them, and then going back to as a service model, and really leveraging distributors who have all those in place for them today that maybe they don't have with us.
When you're looking at distribution, what's kind of the one metric you look at first to decide whether distributor is meeting the bar, is delivering net new value to Dell?
New partner recruitment, right? Multiple lines of business. So, not just focused in one area of our business, but, it's selling across all lines of business. And then we rely on distribution. We just moved, 10,000 partners last year over to distribution led. So, where those partners can procure direct from Dell in the past, now they can't, and they buy strictly through distribution. And those are our authorized partner community, and potentially in the future expanding that to other levels of our business, and offloading them to distribution. So Dell's a very channel friendly partner, distribution led company, and I think that doesn't always get seen, and we're moving that way.
How did that process go, and any learnings from moving those 10,000 partners that may inform what you do in moving the next group, if there is a next group to be moved?
Exactly, a lot. And a lot of that is in data transfer, and making sure that the distributors have the right data, to target those partners and give those partners the service. The distributors all had to, ramp up their infrastructure to support those partners, credit line facilities, with those partners that, because they didn't do business with those partners, onboarding some of those partners as net new to distribution and never bought, from distribution before. And then again, really, letting those partners know the value of distribution. And we've seen, since we've moved those partners over, those partners that have embraced distribution are growing faster than the partners that haven't. So
it's sometimes a lot easier to get that additional support, that additional attention from a distie than it is to try to navigate that.
Yeah, in some cases they can support them better than we can.
Yeah.
And it's proven in the last year.
What's the single most underutilized resource that you guys have through distribution in terms of what partners are using?
I would say the AI accelerator programs I spoke about earlier. I mean, that's key. Going back to the enablement piece, I just don't think a lot of partners understand the value in, they come to these events, they make the statements, hey, we need help here, we need to leverage distribution for that help. You especially when you come to a Dell Tech World or you go to one of our competitors' events or peers, and our distributors have that enablement piece for you to get started that you need to leverage, right? Because it's not just point solution type conversation. It's broad, and so really leveraging them to help.
Along the same lines, but a little bit different. Obviously, we've touched on the idea of cross-selling and the idea that, surprise, surprise, Dell would like partners to sell more of the portfolio, better together, all that kind of stuff. For an MSP or VAR whose, primary look at Dell to date has been selling end devices, laptops, desktops, etc., sourced through distribution, what do you see as the most likely next logical step to expand that relationship, to get thinking across lines? What are some of the common threads for best ways to approach that?
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough question. Common ways to approach, how to sell cross lines of business, right? Take it back to the customer level. Your customer's buying these products, right? And they may be buying them from somebody else, or they may be buying them online, depending on the size of the organization, so on. Again, service model, going back to, it's another service revenue stream that they can leverage. But I think, when you look at the distributors, they have a lot of, talk tracks, with the partners and how to do that better than we do. So, that's why we really leverage them when we say, hey, we want to sell more, our client peripheral, devices. We start with distribution. We start with the partner community, and that it's paid off. And I think it's just really don't leave revenue on the table. And we've been saying it for years, and I think it's starting to resonate, and leveraging distribution to push that, message forward. And I think partners are starting to catch on.
All right. Great insights. Anthony, I thank you for taking the time. I'm sure it's been a busy week for you here. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
There you have it, Anthony Tanoury from Dell Technologies. I'd like to thank Anthony for carving out some time in what I'm sure was a very busy week on the show floor here at DTW. A few things from the conversation that I thought were worth pulling out. First, the 10,000 partners that Dell moved to distribution-led buying last year. That's not a small number, and the fact that those partners are outgrowing the ones who haven't yet made that transition should be a data point for anyone still on the fence about how they structure their Dell relationship. Second, when Anthony named net new partner recruitment as his primary metric for judging distributor performance, not revenue, not attach rate, net new, that tells you something about where Dell thinks its distribution channel still has room to grow. And third, if you haven't looked at the AI accelerator programs your distributor's running, that came up twice as the single most underutilized resource available to partners right now. Probably worth a phone call. I'd like to thank you as always for listening to the show. Please follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, most directories. Ratings and reviews are always appreciated as well. Until next time, I'm Robert for channelbuzz.ca, and I'll see you in the channel.